Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this very important discussion focusing on the neglected conflicts in Libya, Sudan, and Yemen as we examine the humanitarian conditions, internal and external challenges, and prospects for political resolutions. My name is Tamara Kharoub. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Senior Fellow at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. And we are very happy to be organizing today's event in partnership with the MENA Programme at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI. Thanks to everyone who helped in the planning of this webinar, both at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. and at SIPRI. For those not familiar with Arab Center, Washington, D.C., we are a independent nonprofit organization or think tank based in Washington, D.C., focusing on the study of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and North Africa. And we pay special attention to issues of human rights, democracy, international law, and just and peaceful resolution to conflict. This year, 2025, is our 10th anniversary, so hard to believe that we've been doing this work for 10 years. Our mission is to provide Arab and indigenous perspectives to U.S. policy conversations and to center human and rights-based approaches to policymaking. And this is why today's topic is very important to us, and we're very happy to be hosting this or co-hosting with SIPRI this very important conversation. As developments in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon are dominating the MENA news headlines, the crises in Libya, Sudan, and Yemen fell under the radar and seem to have been forgotten, and the suffering of civilians neglected. Yet these remain among the deadliest and most concerning conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, with very devastating humanitarian consequences and human rights violations. And to discuss these really critical issues at this time, we are very grateful to have an excellent lineup of experts joining us today, who will provide us with a much needed understanding of recent developments in each of Libya, Sudan, and Yemen. And the discussion, I will hope, will explore the current status and key drivers of the conflict and warring parties, the humanitarian conditions and prospects for accountability for war crimes and justice for victims, the internal challenges and the roles of foreign interventions, and pathways for ending the stalemates and reaching political resolution. Many thanks to all the speakers for joining us today, for offering their time and insights, and I very much look forward to their contributions. And now I will turn it over to Ala Tartir, who is a senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. He's also a research associate at the Center on Conflict Development and Peace Building at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Thank you, Ala, for working with us on this and for chairing the discussion today. And thanks to all our audience members for joining us. Ala, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tamara, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for being with us today on this webinar and on this panel, jointly organized, as Tamara said, by the Arab Center in DC and SIPRI. I look forward to moderating this discussion on neglected conflicts in Libya, Sudan, and Yemen, humanitarian conditions, challenges, and prospects for resolution. We're tackling three different complex conflicts and wars in different settings. And for that, we have excellent speakers, and that I would like to briefly introduce them before we move to the discussion. We have Ilham Saudi with us, who is the co-founder and director of Lawyers for Justice in Libya. Thank you for being with us, Ilham. We have also Yasmin El-Iryani, who is the co-executive director for knowledge production at Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies. And also we have Manal Taha with us, who's a Sudan expert and security analyst. It's really great to have all of you here, and thank you also for the audience who's with us today. This panel is recorded. It will be available online and live streamed as we speak. And all your questions and comments are welcome. You can share them through the Q&A function. And also, if you prefer to send them via email, you can send your questions to the email address at events@arabcenterdc.org. If you can send that any questions that you have to that email address, we'll make sure that we will have the questions contributing to the discussion here, as we mentioned. And as Tamara mentioned, the conflicts in Libya, Sudan, and Yemen remain among the deadliest and most destabilizing in the MENA region. Libya is fragmented, fractured. Sudan, the civil war in Sudan makes very difficult, the worst humanitarian crisis in recent history. Yemen remains in dire humanitarian crisis as well. So for this discussion that we will have today, we will examine key elements of these neglected conflicts, the key drivers for that, and pathways toward potential resolution. I'm aware that we have a lot on our plate here to discuss in 1.5 hours, but we will go through a number of themes that we would like to discuss, moving from one country to the other, from one expert to other, to have also a conversation between the experts before we turn to the conversation with the audience. So if I start with you, Ilham, focusing on Libya here, how do you define the conflict in Libya? What is the nature of the conflict today, and how did it evolve over time? And do you agree with our characterization that the conflict in Libya is a neglected one? So I would like to set the stage with the three speakers here by reflecting on the nature of the conflicts in each context. Ilham.
Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. As a lawyer, I think one of the perils of having me on any panel is I will take a moment to always define the words we're using, because I feel the word conflict is overused and has become so generic that it's important to take a moment by what we mean by conflict. But also, there are different kinds of conflicts. And I think in Libya, we perhaps have a sort of more, I don't know how to explain it, but there's varying layers of conflicts. We've got the conflict, which is the armed conflict, which is probably the traditional definition that you would like me to focus on. There is the conflict that's happening, which is a very economic one, and the battles that are happening between the Central Bank of Libya, the government of Libya, and other economic institutions, and that's resulting in its own paralysis in the country. And then there's also the conflict that is a more civil one, and that is the conflict and the fight or the war that is being waged by the governments in Libya, plural, against its citizens and civil society. And so I think if we take each of those, we have a more sort of varied conversation than focusing perhaps more traditionally on an armed conflict between warring parties, although that is obviously always has been present in Libya in the last 14 years. So I think if we were looking at that, then the current situation in Libya is very tense. We have seen a very deliberate gathering of coalitions between the Tripoli militias to try and secure the capital, because there is a lack of cooperation, let's say, between the militias in Tripoli, and there is a discontent with the current government in Tripoli. And we've also seen that tension increase recently, because the central bank in Libya, which has been in great turmoil over the last 6 months, almost a year, actually has just recently devalued the Libyan dinar, and that's caused a lot of instability at the public level, because the if you like, the purchasing power of the Libyan dinar has been decreased by 25%, and there is unrest, and there is a fear of people taking to the streets over the financial, like that. And so we can see definitely a movement and more armed groups around trying to quash any possible dissent. So I think it's important to see Libya in the context of not only is it city against city, but within each city there are varying militias who are vying for power at any given point, and the deals that are being struck between various political parties and militias are always evolving, always moving, and so your enemy one day could be your ally the next day, and that's very destabilizing for the public. Neglected is a funny concept for me, because by whom? Who's neglecting it? Because it's very much a live concept for us as Libyans, this conflict, right? It's never been neglected by us. It's never been neglecting us. It's been very much impacting us. If we're talking about the international community, is that what we mean when we talk about neglected? Then that framing is super problematic to me, because it only ever makes our conflicts relevant by reference to the other, instead of by reference to us as the people of the conflict. And so perhaps I would really enjoy some time in this conversation to really, really question how we define concepts like neglected, because I think that always frames us externally as an other, as opposed to really internally. We're never neglected in this conflict. We're very much the victims of it, and are very much feeling it.
Thank you, Ilham, for these opening remarks. Manal, what about Sudan? How do we define the conflict in Sudan?
Thank you so much, Ala. I'm glad that I'm with you here and others. So let me talk about Sudan a little bit about the status of the war now. The status, I can say, the status of the war now in Sudan. Let me give some backup a little bit. The war started on April 2 years before, 15 of April 2023, and between the RSF and the army, which is the RSF is the Rapid Support Forces, is a paramilitary group that used to be together with the army themselves, and they used to be like recognized paramilitary. However, over the competition of resources and control of the governments, we had this one of the most harsh and difficult war in the world now, and it's mainly Sudan has a sources of gold, land, and that became a curse for Sudan, and the competitions between the different variances. So the war mainly, if I want to give like overall of what's happening now, there is advancements happening by the Sudan army and removing or taking the Khartoum state, and which is capital, taking the Jazeera, which is one of the biggest agricultural land in Sudan, and the blue, a lot of area of White Nile and many areas. That makes the challenges bigger, because I don't see that this area is going to be out of the conflicts, because you have small gangs, there's a lot of weapons, and there's a lot of ungoverned land, and there's a collapse of systems to govern and to restore the peace and security in these areas. Plus, RSF is still trying to advance their positions by attacking a lot of areas in northern Sudan, which is the infrastructure. So I don't see the war will stop now. So still the war will continue, but in a different way. So we're going to have small different wars inside, even if there is any peace deal or any stability, still instability in Sudan at the local level is going to be very tough for Sudanese people. If you want to ask me about neglections, okay, why I myself, maybe I believe that Sudan war is completely neglected from the international community. Because I compare it to the crisis that we have it. We have the famine that never happened in our lifetimes. Tell me, what's the international media that really talk about Sudan? Okay, then we have the whole cities was looted. We have the capital destroyed. we have, if I go with numbers, we have 11 million students out of schools for 3 years, because the schools either full by displaced people who are, we have the displaced people also are 11 million inside and 2 million outside as refugees. So that is the bulk of never having on the planet. We are neglected because there is no long commitment for peace in Sudan. When I say that, Sudan war didn't start now. Sudan war started actually the first bullet war in 1952 before our independence and continued. There is no a single time, in this 70 years or 75 years, we don't have a place that didn't have a war in our borders, in our Sudan. That shows us that there is a real commitment to stop this war. If you want to talk about the long commitment, is to talk about development, talk about human resources, talk about education, talk about health. No international community didn't really take that care. They perceive us as a place that we give aid, we give food, and that's it. They didn't see that as a strategic area that can really the international community can benefit. And then you have competing power and competing interest at the regional level, even in Sudan. That's why it makes our problem and our conflict neglected. The number of people killed in Sudan, we don't know how many are now. It's catastrophe. The number of women raped, we don't know how many and how. Even we don't have a single a comprehensive support for women that go through rape, and they use the women bodies as a weapons. So that's not being addressed fully. That tells us exactly how our war is neglected. Then we have there is a political strategic interest. That's why it's competing. Why we don't really take people, international community and donors competitions. Gaza happened, Ukraine happened, then the world move away from Sudan. So the human life and the human suffers, the prolonged human suffers that we measure it as the neglections for conflict, it's happening in Sudan, but they took all the attention, and in Gaza, even the Arab media, they took that attention and now focusing in Gaza and Ukraine. So it tells me the double standard, the human suffering, the human death is not a measure for how the conflict is severe or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. We will come to a number of these options and unpack them even further. But let me go to Yasmin with the same question, Yasmin. So we all define the conflicts that we're talking about. And in the case of Yemen, how do we define the conflict in Yemen? And what is the nature of that conflict today?
Thank you for having me. And I think if I talk about the nature of conflict in Yemen, it's not very different from what Ilham described or what Manal described. Of course, each country has its own specificities, but in Yemen, I think it's also important to see the kind of long historic trajectory of the conflict. So, and this is maybe something similar to what Manal was saying, is that what we're seeing today is the result of a certain historic trajectory and certain moments of evolution that also took place. So if we think about the pre-2011 period, there were pockets of conflict within Yemen, and there was a lot of grievances and mismanaged conflicts, let's say, and also, of course, a certain level of unaccountability to what was happening under the previous regime. And then 2011 created a moment, of course, that we're all familiar with by now, and it created a political opening, but with that also came some political vacuum that was exploited by certain groups. And then we moved into a transitional period that had its shortcomings and even failures, and was very weak in reading the context and the situation. So while people were having a national dialogue in a 5-star hotel, there was a military advancement towards the capital. So it was a very blatant misreading of the situation at the time. And of course, the transitional period had other shortcomings. was exploited in many ways. And then we saw the defining moment in 2014 when the Houthis, who were a military movement that started in the north of Yemen, was advancing very rapidly towards the capital and took over the capital Sana'a in 2014, and along with public institutions and staged a coup, basically. And then after that, things developed very quickly. And of course, we had the Saudi-led military operations in Yemen that lasted for multiple years, but yielded no results. At least its intended results completely failed. And then we, over a period of more than 10 years now of this very active conflict, or rather, at times it's more active than others, but quite a continuous conflict. You've had a very complicated picture developing on the ground. So more militias and more war economy taking shape. Fragmentation of the economy was very obvious. There was a fragmentation of the central banks between the interim capital Aden and the official capital Sana'a. That was then taken by the Houthis, and this fragmentation in fiscal and monetary policy, of course, had dire implications on the population. So you had a very difficult humanitarian crisis, and it became harder and harder for people to cope economically with the situation, and at the same time, political fragmentation, and also a competition of regional actors who had stake in Yemen and were directly involved in the conflict. And we've seen since the regionalization of the conflict in Yemen, and also to some extent the internationalization of the conflict at certain times. So it's of course multi-layered, to say it softly, and it becomes more and more complicated with time, and harder to resolve, just simply because of the entrenchment of the militias and war economy, and the various interests that have grown in the conflict and have made the conflict their source of existence, basically, in Yemen. So this is, in a nutshell, maybe the nature of the conflict. But it's also important to, I mean, this is the nature of many conflicts. It's not something unique to Yemen, but it's important to see how Yemen is in this kind of liminal space, as anthropologists like to say, where the past is still very much present. We're still talking about the Republic. We're talking about public institutions. We're talking about something that we call the parliament. We don't know how it looks and whether it still has status or not, but the past is very much present. And at the same time, there is a movement towards a future that holds so many possibilities. We don't know what's going to prevail, and there is this competition over what that future is going to look like and who's going to control it, what kind of identities will form and dominate, and also the shape and form of Yemen as a state is at stake here. So this period is extending for longer than it should, and it's creating a lot of uncertainties, and we see that also the way Yemen is interacting with the region, the way that it's engaging in other regional conflicts, and that's complicating the picture beyond Yemen. Yemen is no longer shaped by regional dynamics and regional competition, but also it's now shaping some of these regional dynamics in a, one would say, a negative way.
Yasmin, I mean, as Manal and Ilham, you also refer to history, you also refer to the past, which is absolutely, part of the story, being rooted. But if we want to look at Yemen today, and you mentioned multiple elements of the conflict, but for you, what are the most troubling aspects of the conflict today? If you can share the most troubling aspects as of today in Yemen, and then I would like to move to Manal to Sudan, and then to Ilham to Libya. What would be these aspects? Yes,
I
please.
mean, yeah, the part of it is that, you know, it's neglected, and I would emphasize that. In the past, we heard more that Yemen is a forgotten war. I don't like that description of Yemen. It's not forgotten. What's happening in Yemen is very visible to the world, but it has been left to fester, and only when it becomes a regional or an international problem, like what we're seeing in the Red Sea attacks, that it gets some mode of attention or form of attention that is that's more of a response to a crisis rather than an engagement with Yemen at a strategic level, similar to what Manal mentioned. So this neglect is more, I think it's something that one can say is also a part of the misreading of events at certain times, at certain formative moments in Yemen, where if the engagement was more strategic, we could have dealt with the situation differently. We know that there were phases of dealing with Yemen that kind of ranged from security outlook, especially dealing with issues like Al-Qaeda and extremist groups, and then it shifted into this humanitarian crisis response, and then back into a security lens now with the Red Sea operations and the Houthis. So this is not a strategic engagement with Yemen. I would not say that, and that's part of the problem. But also, there are, of course, at the domestic level, there are local drivers, and when we say neglected, then you're also primarily neglecting these local drivers, because if you're not dealing with that, then you are not dealing with Yemen as Yemen. You are dealing with Yemen as a sidekick of another country or a regional competition or something like that. And I think that's also a big part of the problem. And then we also know that there is a lot of weapons and money coming into the country that's going in the hands of different conflict parties, and still we're caught in this narrow interests of conflict parties with a lack of a national vision for Yemen. And there's a reason for this. There are internal and external factors for the way that domestic conflict parties behave. It's not only of their making, but also of the environment that has been created by regional and international actors. I don't think we have time to go so much into detail, but maybe we can talk more as we go.
I will come in a second to the regional actors in particular. But Manal, if you take us to
what
Sudan.
bothered me most is the double standard that the world and international community hold it out towards Sudan conflict. When I say double standard, it's to what extent that they are defining the severity and cruelty of the war. Is it by human loss, by people died, by destructions? That is in Sudan. So the attention is not there. The priority is not there. Then at the other level, internally, what bothered me, the target of civilians. The two parties, like, I don't see them as a Sudanese. I don't see there's a very constructive or built-in mechanism to protect civilians in Sudan from both sides. So when they have the attack and we have the command and they are doing their invasions, the consideration of civilians' lives is not their higher standard. That's what I felt it, because we have the number of people died. They died in very ugly way. And then the brutality. This tells me, like, it actually manifested in different ways. It's how the two parties actually are willing to coordinate to open corridors for aid, for people are having food, for children are starving. The prisoners, for just like we have some videos just lately, were prisoners by RSF in some of their area in Khartoum. After the SAF, the army went to Khartoum, they found people died because of the hunger. They imprisoned them, civilians, hundreds of them, and they locked them, and they will die of, there's no water, there's no food for them. So it's like intentionally killing civilians. So that's what bothered me. And then the attack of the civilians and attack by the Air Force or by the drones, and recently targeting the infrastructures like water and dams and electricity productions. Then the other things, we are the only nation now on this planet. We have 2 genocides in less than 25 years. And little attention paid to that. There's no even a documentation for human right abuses. We didn't have a documentation of the death. We didn't have a legal documentations how we can hold those people accountable. So people don't care. Tell me what the nation on the planet that have 2 genocides in less than 25 years and nobody cares like this in Sudan. So the moral standard of the global, how to measure this conflict is severe, and this conflict is even genocide. They will say for political, you win. After, people will pressure them, but then they don't act upon it. No support at any level. So that's what's bothered me. It makes me so angry.
Well, before then going to Ilham and Manal, you mentioned double standards a number of times so far. And if I'm not mistaken, today starts the initial public hearing at the International Court of Justice on the case of genocide. Does that fear of double standards also extend to that domain? What double standards when it comes to international law as well, vis-a-vis the case of genocide in the ICJ, or is that a different story?
I mean, when I said the neglection and the 2 genocides happen, is like how the international community actually look at this country, at this conflict as a severe conflict and need to be addressed with the long-term commitment to end the suffering of people. So this is the amount of millions of people and displaced and killed. So we did not get any support. To document our loved one that died, our houses looted. We don't have a single hospitals in the country. All the banks were looted. And then this kind of things, if it happens in any country, that it will get their attention. So they don't get attention because they don't see Sudan as important. So human lives are not a standard for them. It could be standard in different places with different measurements, okay? So what's happening in Ukraine, but for here in Sudan, I don't see them look at it as something important. So human lives itself, it varies for them. That's what the double standard for me.
Thank you. And Ilham, if you take us to Libya now, where do we stand in terms of conflict dynamics today, but also what are the most troubling aspects of that conflict today?
No, as I listen to Yasmin and Manal, there is so much of the shared frustration, right? And I think it's worth taking a moment to, is it double standards if it's so true in so many places? Are we just not accepting that the standard is of neglect? And I think there is a moment to reflect on that, because if I think Libya is facing a double standard, Manal thinks Sudan is facing a double standard, Yasmin is saying there's no strategic approach to Yemen, then actually it's sounding like the norm is this new reality, as opposed to we're trying to exceptionalize. And I think the danger, this is just a general comment before I get into Libya, the danger is that we end up then competing as conflicts as opposed to effectively working as allies. And I think that's what this system, which is the norm. It is not an exception for Libya to be neglected. It is not an exception for Sudan or Yemen to be neglected. And I think, there is an element of, at least on our part, trying to really, understanding that entering into this competition of the greatest suffering, the greatest numbers is an unhealthy one, and is one that only serves this agenda of prioritizing conflict instead of recognizing that conflict is conflict. And so I think it's important that we don't fall into that trap. And this is a reminder to myself of now feeling like I need to up the Libyan conflict to be able to come out of this webinar feeling I've achieved my purpose of advocating for Libya. Because I think what we end up doing is, wait, listen, my horror stories are a lot worse, and I don't think that's the healthy approach. And when I listen to what, to my very eloquent co-panelists, I really understand that actually what's probably my greatest frustration is this need to almost, and I hate to be so vulgar, but the porn of conflict, right? Of trying to make this so sensational to get the attention of the internationals. And so what is it that then frustrates me is the lack of agency we have in telling our stories, because we've now had to play this game and we're not saying the stories the way we feel them as Libyans or Yemenis or Sudanese. We're saying them the way to get the attention we need. And that lack of agency, what we found in Libya, empowers the current political elites in the country because they play into that. And so one of the greatest frustration in Libya is you get very, very powerful in the sense that they're getting they're looting all of Libya's wealth, these governments in Libya. They are taking all of these advantages. But the minute they're put into the international context, they talk about Libya as a failed state. And they play into that narrative of like, well, Libya is a failed state. We can't do anything as a government. And they absolve themselves of any accountability, of any responsibility, of any agency in the future of the country. And I think what's really dangerous in Libya, and we felt massively, is nothing is progressing without internationals. And this lack of agency is what troubles me the most, because it means that every single process in Libya, whether it's the political process or whether it's drafting any law, now has to be led by an international committee or international experts. And then that creates this vacuum constantly that whatever's being produced has no legitimacy with those on the ground. And then that lack of legitimacy feeds itself, and the conflict escalates, and the Libyan governments, both of them, will constantly play the failed state card internationally to abdicate themselves of any responsibility. And so what we get is actually a culture that we're building of complete impunity for the violators, complete lack of accountability, and the ultimate status quo that we're in Libya. We've been in the same situation for 14 years, and we will be in the same situation for the next 14 years, because the status quo suits everyone in the political elite in the country and in the international community that we're fixated on attracting to the situation in Libya. They don't want to be interfering in Libya because the status quo suits them. They still have the deals they need on migration, which is Libya's issue, right? So Yasmin was talking about in Yemen, the focus sometimes is on counterterrorism or what's happening. Libya, the focus has always been migration. And so as long as Italy and the EU can make their deals with Libya on migrant flows, they are okay with whoever's in power. And they could not give a hoot on anything about the people. And so it's very difficult for me as a human rights activist to be thinking, we also need to know how to play this game, because we can't be using human rights language when they're talking about a different language. And I think in some ways, you know, we're being hosted by the Arab Center in DC. What's coming out of DC is the most honest reflection of international policy everywhere. The lack of interest, the lack of a strategic approach, the lack of any civilian interest in the cost of these conflicts, and the focus on America first. That is a policy everywhere. It's just America's doing it in a very blunt way now. And I think it's a blessing in disguise for us to be able to have a conversation where we say, okay, we know our reality. So why are we pretending we're speaking a different language? And can we try to have a conversation around how we interact with our reality as opposed to the ideology we've all grown up in?
So many thoughts there, like really to think about. So thanks for putting them on the table. And I will come back to the notion of status quo and how we can shake that in the different conflicts in order to move to other phase of, let's say, conflict resolution, because status quo seems to be dominant in so many conflicts around the region. But Ilham, I would like to go back to the idea of lack of agency that you talked about here, and try to link that with regional and international interventions in the case of Libya here. Because there have been obviously many interventions with positive and negative results. But now, if you want to reflect on that, what would be two rules of thumb that any external intervention should keep in mind? All these external actors, regional or internationals, what are these issues, principles, rules that they need to keep in mind when they intervene?
I'm going to admit, Ala, I had a problem with this question when I saw it,
Sure.
and I have a problem with the question now, because I think, again, if we're talking about agency, why are we framing it from the perspective of the international's interests, right? Why am I talking about what they need to be bringing to the table as opposed to what we should be putting in?
No, it's this is why I'm linking it with the agency, because so it is for you that you put on their table what are these principles that they should not violate, that in many of the conflicts we have around here, international interventions arguably caused harm, right? So when we bring the agency to the discussion here, how do we ensure accountability in that intervention? That's what I'm referring to.
So I think there's two angles. One is the idealist, and then one's the pragmatist. So perhaps I give you one of each for the two that you requested. The idealist in me will say, well, these countries should be adhering to the principles that govern international intervention. And so there's a responsibility in doing that. There's a responsibility to protect, there's a responsibility to rebuild, there is a responsibility to bring things within the framing of a human rights perspective and a human rights-based approach, and any intervention needs to yada, yada, yada. We all learned this in law school, we all know this from international law documents. And that's what we've been telling these international actors for 14 years, right? That's the idealist approach. And we will continue to do that because that's what motivates our mission. I think the pragmatist approach is the way it's been done to date has not worked. And therefore, we can't keep repeating. And I think this inability to learn that is really personifies international interventions in our part of the world, the inability to reflect genuinely on lessons learned, or even is just not there. And so we have had 14 years of political processes which are effectively the same process over and over and over and over again. And I am sure Yasmin and Manal will have had experiences where not only are they repeat within their own situation, but the repeat that have been copied and pasted from another situation from a completely different context. The lack of engaging of the public in the design of political processes is probably my biggest issue, because that again does not create agencies for the Libyan citizens, the Libyan people, the migrants in Libya, everyone who's in those borders, and it also doesn't create legitimacy for that process. As someone who was selected, and I use that word very deliberately, by the UN to be part of one of these political processes, I didn't even know why I was there at the time, and no one could tell me why I was selected, other than presumably because I'm a woman and I am an international lawyer and they needed that profile. But there was nothing there that made us as a group of people coming up with a political solution credible to the public, because it was all selection. There was no public vetting of our credentials. There was no public engagement about who should be in this or why we should be, or any oversight by the public. And therefore, from day one, there was legitimate suspicion of the outcomes before they even started. And now we've just started a new process in the exact same manner, where a group of elites have been selected to take the conversation forward. The group that Yasmin refers to as those in five-star hotels, who don't have legitimacy with those who are suffering on the ground and are meant to be the ones that speak on their behalf. And so I think it is really important. And if there's one thing to do, is just to reflect and to learn and to see that repeating the same thing doesn't make you efficient. It makes you an idiot because you're not learning from your previous expertise. And all we get is the same process again with a different SRSG leading it, but it will be the same outcome. And it's all short-termist. And I think if we had taken a slightly more nuanced and long-term approach 14 years ago, this would have taken less than the several short-term approaches that we've taken that have dragged this on. So even from a purely expedient or efficient way, this has actually taken longer than having a process that was much more long-termist in its approach. And so I guess my two takeaways is, one, the idealist side, which is just do what you're meant to do by international law and we'll be in better position than what we're seeing today. And the more pragmatist is, it doesn't work anyway. And so you need to do something that actually creates legitimacy and agency on the ground to be able to get legitimacy at the political elite level.
Thank you, Ilham, for this. I will come back to the question of political processes there. But Manal, if we move to Sudan with regional and international interventions, any lessons learned in line of what Ilham just mentioned?
I really respect and I like the idea of lack of agency. We don't have it, and I felt it, you know. Thank you so much, Ilham, for saying this. Maybe I see the Sudan situation is different. So we have the largest humanitarian crisis. So if we don't really talk to international community about the kids that are dying because there is no food, and they will not get our attention. So we need the attention in this specific context. However, I can say Sudan war is not just a local war. It's international, regional war in our local land. Okay, so that makes it, even our peace process, if you come to it a lot later, it's all of it's made by international communities. It was a quick fix deal, distribution of wealth and money. So that's why we did not have a last long peace agreements. In every peace agreements, we have a seat for another war. So because of what you said, that the inclusivity, the way we want it, the way we should tell our stories, the way our story appear in our peace agreements, we should have these agreements that reflect our suffering as humans and address the main issues that we're going through. This is lacking. We are in the middle. We are captured in the middle. We have a humanitarian crisis. We have people died. We have kids raped. Okay, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years raped. There is not even a medical kit to support them, because lack of accessibility in many places for health, no health facilities, nothing. It's the most devastating place on the planet now. And that's why we need attention, because now we need this. So our stage is in a humanitarian crisis. We need this support from international. That's why I would love to have my own agency to talk about my peace and the way I want it. But now I need the international to get the attention to see what's happening in Sudan. At least, just to keep the international and regional influence from fluiding the conflict more and more inside the country. So that's what I can say on this.
Thanks, Manal, for bringing this quick fixes issues to the story. Yasmin, from Yemen perspective, what are other issues to keep in mind concerning external interventions and regional interventions?
I mean, I agree with what Ilham and Manal said in many ways, and this issue of agency is really key, because if we're thinking about the political actors in Yemen, or the conflict parties, there's, we describe them as fragmented and dysfunctional, and narrow interested, and unable to be effective on the ground, and so on. And as I said before, there are internal reasons for this, but also external ones. And the external ones is that they are associated with regional powers who they end up kind of defining their interests based on the interests of their regional allies. And so in that way, at the very high political level, there is a lack of agency. And we see this in very critical moments where there is an opening or an opportunity for the course of the war to shift, but it doesn't, because the political actors or the conflict parties are not able to exercise their agency. And you also see it in other levels. For example, the way that the humanitarian aid operations is implemented, the way that it's designed, it's top down, and in that sense, you have more than 10 years of humanitarian aid operations. At some point, it was the biggest globally, that is defined from the top, with no attempt to activate the local agency of Yemenis who are receiving the aid, who should be saying how it is designed, what kind of aid is given, in what form, and so on. But that didn't happen. Also, the agency in how we define the problem, how we talk about Yemen, how we do the analysis. In the Yemen case, for example, a lot of the analysis is done by international institutions. They are orienting towards the interests and priorities of different countries besides Yemen, or other than Yemen. And so in that sense, the way the problems are the diagnosis of the problem in Yemen is done by other people and for other reasons than the Yemen interest or the interests of Yemenis. And so there is also a lack of agency there. At Sana'a Center, we try to present ourselves as the Yemeni organization that creates that platform, but it's still there's still a big gap in that way. And I think the way that you diagnose a problem, if it's not done by the people of the country and the people who are experiencing the conflict, then it's definitely lacking. And just to reflect a little bit on what we mean by interventions, to say how interventions should look like or what the parameters should be is a very difficult question, because countries intervene if they have national interest in that, and they will do it to the extent that it serves its national interest. And there's no way around this. This will never change. And we will never see a world where there are no interventions, because it's the way that states, of course, try to project power, and it's a way for them to also ensure their own national interests are prioritized. And I think it would be really idealistic to think that we can shift that. The only way to do it is to have from the inside, to have a clear idea of what should be done, and then to push for that. Of course, there will be also engagement with Yemen, for example, and I'm sure it's the same with Libya and with Sudan in different forms, but the engagement is important. And what I said earlier about a strategic engagement is not idealistic, because you engage with Yemen at a strategic level to avoid a crisis like what we are seeing now in the Red Sea that is affecting world commerce and creating a whole set of other problems that were not foreseen. But you cannot wait for that crisis to emerge for thinking of what should the response be to develop. If there's no strategic engagement, then ultimately this interconnectedness is lost, and the ability to understand the dynamics is lost. So I don't think we can foresee a situation where there are no interventions, or we can even tell states how to intervene or not, because we know that ultimately they will intervene for their own national interest. But in Yemen, this interest is shaped or not shaped by the lack of agency or the availability of agency of the political actors. And at the moment, it's lacking.
Okay, thanks. Let me then keep the focus and center the notion of agency here, because it's fundamental to all what we're doing. So two elements, and this is, Yasmin, I will start with you. So when we talk about agency, then there must be national institutions that are able to carry the burden and able to represent, being perceived legitimate, functional, effective. So in Yemen, how do you see this element, which is important to the element of agency? Do we have the institutional infrastructure that can take Yemen closer to peace? Although that sounds very far away, but that's part one of the question, an assessment of the institutional infrastructure. The second part of it is, and here linking it with the international dimension, if you like, is how do we assess the different political processes and dialogues and conversations and talks that aims to get us towards the resolution, again keeping agency in mind. So I want to start with you, Yasmin, on reflections on that, please. And for our audience, thank you so much for all the questions that you're sending. I'm keeping a note, and you can share them in the Q&A function or send them to the email that is events@arabcenterdc.org. Yasmin.
So the institutional infrastructure, I think this is a very important point. it was weak in Yemen even before the war, and in some ways co-opted by the regime, so not really serving its public purpose. But there were state institutions, and they were functional in some ways. Of course, after more than 10 years of war, and the loss of the capital Sana'a and its infrastructure there, and also the public service that was trained and that's competent, was lost in the process. Then we have, of course, a collapse of public institutions that could that could basically hold a process even if you have a political crisis. And this is a severe problem. And I think one way of dealing with this problem is to really focus on strengthening some of these public institutions at the very local level, because this is something that directly touches people. It's a question of services, of public services that the Yemeni citizen feels day to day. So if you have an improvement there, then you have a sense of possibly a representation. You feel that this party represents your interests, is serving you in some way. At the moment, this is really lacking. There are some attempts at the very local level, and this is what happened in Yemen. There was a very centralized government, but with the conflict, it became de facto decentralized, which means that some of the governorates or some of the provinces that have some resources took things in their own hands and became more autonomous, and public services were maintained at the local level because of local initiative rather than national policy. But this is important because this creates a sense that you have a relationship with the government, and this government, one way or another, represents you even if there are no elections. Another important institution that has been completely paralyzed is the parliament. The parliament has not been able to convene since, well, from the beginning of the war. It convened once in 2019, I think, if I remember correctly. And its term has elapsed a long time ago, and you have no parliament to even present a facade of representation at some level. So you have a serious crisis of representation across the board. And this is connected to also the ability of state institutions to operate, and as I said, also public service. So in Yemen, public servants haven't been able to receive salaries for years. They receive partial salaries, sometimes they don't receive any salaries. So they lost their income, and we lost a trained public service that can take up these institutions. I think there was another question about the peace process and how that was designed. I mean, just to not take so much time about this, it's the quick fixes is really the problem, and it's like shooting yourself in the foot, because you think that by going through this shortcut, you're somehow going to create a situation where things can go in a positive direction, but it never happens. And this, I mean, I can talk about the Yemen context. Every time there was this jump into a quick fix, shortcut, a quick agreement, let's sign this and we figure out the details later, it creates a bigger problem afterwards. For a long time, I think the peace process in Yemen, the formal one, or the UN-led process, was trying to manage the conflict. It no longer was really thinking about a peace plan, a comprehensive peace plan. And then at some point in the last couple of years, when there was a truce in 2022 that somehow continued, even if it was not renewed since, I don't remember exactly the year, but maybe 2023 or something like that. It still continued as a matter of fact, which created a deception of calm, that there is, a level of calm. There are no very active front lines as it was before. And that led to a process where There were some peace talks that were very exclusive, very elite, and excluding other parties. The UN's role in this process was non-existent almost. And a lot of people who were observing the process were trying to point out to these problems and potential spoilers and the potential risks of a process like this. But there was also a level of being tone deaf to what was being mentioned in terms of concerns of Yemenis who were following the process closely. And we were coming very, very close to a settlement that, as I said, was exclusive and elitist, but still was one of these kind of quick fixes that some people were bargaining on. And it collapsed because at some point, 7 October happened, and the Houthis decided that, well, they have a bigger role to play at the regional level, and they want to become a bigger player within this so-called axis of resistance, and they threw that out of the window. And we have a situation really now where it's really uncertain what kind of peace process there would be. And in this entire process, I think in these couple of years, the UN's role was really marginal, in the sense that it was watching and observing what was happening, but it was not shaping it. And it was also accepting empty promises, unfeasible promises of a peace process to come, that one of the conflict parties was saying, we commit to a peace process after the settlement is done and we get everything we want. And of course, that's not realistic, because if you get everything you want, you will not come back to the table for any other reason. And I think that's a big failure in the process.
Thank you for all these insights, Yasmin. Ilham, if we want to move to Libya, keeping the focus on these two rather broad questions on the institutional infrastructure for the day after, if you like, and then also on the different political processes that you hinted to earlier on.
Yeah, I think if we look at the infrastructure issue in Libya, I think it's important to recognize the day before as well, which is that the Gaddafi era, the Gaddafi regime built institutions that are by design corrupt. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If you look at the key institutions in Libya, whether that's the National Oil Company or the central bank in Libya or any of the investment agencies in Libya, in addition to the ministries, it is all designed to be reliant on favoritism and nepotism. And the only way, even if you look at the way those positions are hired and selected and everything, it is by design corrupt. And so if we're going to look at those institutions, it needs to be a complete redesign, or in fact, almost a complete destruction and rebuilding, to be able to get something that works and is legitimate and is transparent and is credible. There are institutions that are slightly better than others, but overall, it was very much created so that it could be led by one person. And I think it's important to remember that as we try to revisit these institutions. How appointments are made to the judiciary, how judges are, appointed and removed, who's appointed to be the governor of the central bank, who's appointed to be the head of the National Oil Company. All those are by their infrastructure designed to be controlled. And so I think if we want to build this agency we're talking about and this legitimacy we're talking about, we're going to have to look at it from a design perspective as well as everything else. There's also a complete lack of trust in these institutions, because they have failed repeatedly in serving their purpose. If you look at Libya Libya's the presumption that Libya is this wealthy country, but if you then look at how it functions and the fact that you can't get medical treatment that is very basic without really moving to Tunisia or one of our other neighboring countries, it's because the infrastructure is again designed to be corrupt. So I can give an example there. Everything in Libya that needs to be brought in imported. Nothing is made in the country. To be able to import key goods, and because of Libya's credit and Libya's sort of history, that has to be done through letters of credit with commercial banks and with the central bank as an agent. And then now what we've seen is, those letters of credit are a primary way for militia leaders or other leaders in the country to get their cut of the proceeds. And so even the most basic provisions that need to be provided in terms of healthcare, in terms of goods that are needed to be able to for the population to survive, they have been completely corrupted, because that is a source of income for key players in the new system. And so I think it's important to recognize that, what we've done is got rid of one Gaddafi and replaced it with hundreds of Gaddafis, but that's kind of the model that we're still working with. And I think for us to be able to create a space for citizens to engage politically, we need to deal with the daily injustices that citizens face because of this corruption, because of this lack of infrastructure, because of complete lack of adequate institutions. If you're a Libyan citizen, from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, you're just putting out fires in terms of getting your kids to school. And we're an oil producing country that imports its oil for local use. That's how inefficient the system is, that you have to queue for hours to fill your car in a country that produces oil is wrong. The fact that then that imported oil costs less than water is corruption as well. And so I think all these elements end up in a situation where you as a Libyan citizen are just trying to stay alive and trying to make things work, instead of trying to engage politically and build a country. And I think, again, that even that structure is by design to keep us busy with just being alive, so that we don't question the status quo. I think that is also by design. And I think it's kind of living in a rentier state without the rentier resources at the moment. And so it's a very odd reality. On the part of the political process, I think that all these flaws in the infrastructure and the institutions is reflected in the political process, because you're dealing with a system of political processes that is about placating people as opposed to really engaging on the issues. And so it's about bringing those to the table who are effectively the cause of the problems and rewarding them in some ways. I think one of the big fundamental flaws of the political processes we've seen is they're designed to incentivize only, right? And so there's always there's always a carrot, but no stick to these processes. And therefore, you're again creating this culture where failure gets you to the table and gets you to decision making, and corruption gets you to those tables. When I was in the political process, because of the inability of the UN to put in place proper vetting for the candidates of the political process, despite the work of myself and others who really cared about these issues, that the final two candidates to be the head of the government, one was implicated in some of the worst violations we've seen in the war in 2014. And the other is the man with the most of Libya's money in his pockets, who's now our prime minister. And so you've got, the final two candidates, one had hands filled with blood and the other had hands filled with cash. And that is entirely the international community's fault for not putting in place vetting systems that would have allowed us to eliminate these people very early on in the process. Instead, we were told that actually, all Libyans should have a say in this and all of them should participate in this process, which isn't the case when it's a process based on selecting who decides what to do. And so I think when we look at these political processes, again, everything that Yasmin was saying rings so true, because it feels like the UN's processes are built effectively to maintain the status quo, right? What can we do to just minimize the damage, these quick fixes that we talk about, that ultimately have resulted in stagnations of decades in these processes? And so it is this false kind of narrative that this is going to get, like, a quick solution is going to work. But I think I'll also add, it's also this idea that there is a multilateral process when there isn't, because whilst we have these kind of UN-led processes, there are daily bilateral deals that are being done on the side of those. And so it is very difficult to sustain the credibility or the primacy of the multilateral process when, the people who are the same countries who are purporting to be part of the multilateral process are then signing bilateral agreements with Libyan actors on issues that contradict that completely. And so, a very good example of that is having a UN-led process, whereas Italy signing deals with militia leaders to control migration. But we get the same from Turkey. We get the same from others engaging in the Libyan process, where they will continue to have bilateral engagements. And so that as well, that is not it's not conducive to a healthy process. And so there needs to be there's a bit to look at in terms of how we hold the international actors accountable as well in these processes. And I guess the final thing I'll say on the political process as well, and I'll continue to repeat it, is this creation of a false elite in the country, an elite that has been selected by these international actors, that is not elite in the perspectives or in the minds of those on the ground. It's not representative in the minds of those on the ground. And it's creating a repulsion in every sense of that word of the internationalized process. And so I think for us to have any chance with this latest process, incidentally, where we're meant to get recommendations from this new advisory committee created by the UN on the 22nd of April for a way forward, that is not going to register on any Libyan's radar, because they've already been discredited as a group of people selected by the UN. And so I think I know that what is absolutely needed is a process where there is a genuine consultative process with those on the ground about who, how, and what is needed from a political process. Because at the moment, that's not happening, and therefore it will never be legitimate, and we're going to have this exact same conversation next year.
Thank you for all that, Ilham. Manal, how does the case of Sudan contrast with the case here of Libya or Yemen? How different, how similar?
We are not very different, by the way. What I'm listening to Ilhan and also to Yasmin, I can relate to what they are saying, especially in the political processes. But we have also our own package of problems in Sudan. And I will go just back. And I was saying that before this war, we had the different wars in different areas. But we have some areas that where they were stable. They were stable because we have infrastructure that make that communities stable to large extents, which is the human-to-human connections, relationships, social relationships, were part of the resilience for many parts in Sudan to hold the peace. So that's given. However, this latest, the current war, it's a huge collapse because it's happening everywhere. If it doesn't happen directly, it affects you directly. Because displacement, no education, the system of government system collapsed. Sudan occurs in the past, we have the centralized services, centralized government that took a lot of services and also voices of marginalized area into the government. The national architect for peace infrastructures was not really intact because you don't find a very functioning peace commissions or peace committee or ministers. They just they put it aside, okay, to implement peace agreements, which itself, it was a quick deal to fix, and usually it's excluded. Some powerful country, they will come and under supervision or orientation from the UN would put the same elites in the room, excluded women and youth, excluded everybody, local communities. Sometimes they put them in like consultations from far away, but after the deal done, okay, and it's all our peace agreements, it's about power sharing and who is taking what from the share, from the cake, from the resources, but we never talk about how to address the trauma in Sudanese humans, how to address the kids that doesn't go to schools. So that was not part of it. Then we have a different problems that the polarizations. We have a tribal and ethnic component in our communities. The polarizations, the ethnic polarizations, and the huge machines, even sponsored regionally and internationally. Okay, I'm talking that in case of Russia, in case of different countries, regional, that they interfere on the media to polarize Sudanese against Sudanese, and to polarize, to make us hate each other, to look at us. This is things that also it's part of destruction of our peace infrastructures, the resilience of the communities. So this is I'm just giving examples. After the revolution in Sudan, we had only small peace commissions, but there's no it it doesn't have any resources. It was not as a priorities. The people compared to be to work in the Minister of Finance, Minister of Defense, but they did not really take care of this important in that time. Then you have a very, very corrupt system, governance system, institution systems, civic systems, civic service systems. In addition to that, we have our security sector is never been reformed. It's never been reformed to reflect the needs of the civilians' protection as a priority for the security sector itself. Even now, this war, it reflects how our security sector is not reformed, because a lot of paramilitaries, they are part of the national army. They're fighting with them for the needs of to make the peace happen. And they're fighting against a paramilitary or militia that it was part of them, as well part of the government itself. You see how the complexity now we have it in our security sector. It's a hybrid regime. Also, there is a political parties have their people on this in the security sector. So this functioning systems in Sudan led us to this. This war is everywhere now. It's affecting everybody. That's why everybody, we see it, we feel it. So it happened in Darfur. The genocide in 2003 happened in Darfur. My mom didn't know that there was a genocide because she's in the northern Sudan. Okay, it's happened in Nuba Mountain. I was in Nuba Mountain, okay, in South Kordofan. Northern Sudanese even didn't see that as a catastrophe area. So that's it's a part of polarization that we led by elites for their own benefits. So this war walking everybody, walking us like if we don't really work together, okay, and we don't accept each other's, we're not going nowhere. We're going to have this vicious circle of conflict. It continued for the past 70 years and it will continue. So a new model, a new approach has to come to the peace architect in Sudan. It has to come at the national architect at the local level, and how the tribal was politicized, monopolized. It was also part of our problems. So that's maybe we are similar in many ways on the corruption, centralizations, and the elites capturing the resources, negotiating our peace, and neglecting and excluding of the local voices and local suffer. We can't bring everybody to peace agreements, but at least bring their voice, bring their needs, brings what they want to see. So consultations through and addressing their issues and unified goals. That's what we're looking for in our peace agreements.
And Manar, related to that new model or new approach that you talked about, a number of questions here from the audience, and thanks again for all the questions, asking how can we ensure accountability in that? How can we ensure accountability in Sudan? But also, how can we ensure inclusiveness in the political processes? How can civilian actors be represented coming from different religious and ethnic diversity? And any reflection on the question of inclusiveness, especially for religious minorities coming from the audience here, as well as how can we ensure accountability?
So to a large extent, when I look at the past peace agreements in Sudan, we had the issues of representations. Who is representing what? And the representation issue, it became our curse, because every tribe, every place, they said, I'm not represented here, because our leaders themselves, it's about like a personal representations. Who is going there? We should move from this. The representations in our peace agreements should not be by the people. It's about what we want to see. What is the plan? What is the strategic perspectives they have? Those people they're going to negotiate on our behalf. Do you agree with them or not? What we want to see happening in my village, in my town. So that's a new board, a new strategy, a new approach for any peace deal. That's why the quick fix deal that happened in Sudan in the last 50 years is not going to work now. So we need to define how we do our peace processes. And Sudanese if it doesn't have a Sudanese to Sudanese component, it's not going to succeed. If we excluded women as before, it's not going to succeed. If we excluded youth who were actually made the revolution, they show us how a non-violent movements can really take off dictator that stayed for 30 years and reshape the new hope for Sudan. Thus, if there are not these voices in these peace agreements, it's going to fail, and we're going to have another war. Okay, so and that's why, and we don't want to have imposed regional agreements with the two warrior parties. No, this has to be collectively with the whole Sudanese. And to build our peace, sustainable peace, we need to rebuild our institutions. Whatever in the past has to go away. We take the best of it and rebuild it in a different way. That takes us as Sudanese to do it. We may need international help. We will need international help, but we should define what we need in terms of help, where, okay? And we should also have like a social awakening about the corruption. We should reject the corruption as Sudanese. Okay, this is the only way we build our country. Otherwise, we're going to continue on this chaos. Thank you.
We have less than 10 minutes left here, and there are so many still issues and questions to be asked. But I would like to focus on two things. And Yasmin, starting here with you. I mean, recently we've been seeing lots of changes in the region, especially I'm here thinking about changes in Syria, changes in Lebanon. And I'm wondering if there will be a trickle-down effect in the case of Yemen here. Do you see any positive twist to this story that we will be telling soon?
I mean, in terms of kind of contagious, effects from what's happening in the region, it could be in a good way or a bad way. It depends on what prevails. Of course, what's happening in Syria, hopefully will improve the situation there, and we see that perhaps there is very high escalation at the moment in the past year. We all know that. And one of the conflict parties in Yemen was very much involved in this. The Houthis, they took into the Red Sea and they entered into this regional conflict. So there is that effect of kind of escalation reaching Yemen, and also having the spillover effect. The reverse of that could also be possible if we see the bigger players going into de-escalation, negotiations, so on. It's a little bit difficult to predict, to be honest, because now we are at the height of a US military operation in Yemen that's very, very intense. It is happening every day. And we have a serious risk of even further escalation in the region, in Iran and other places. And so that will have a ripple effect on Yemen, because the Houthis they have a higher appetite to go into these risky situations, and they will do it, although they have been hit quite badly now with these strikes, but they have not been eliminated. At the same time, we also know that there's a political will now, or it appears to be there, to go into negotiations very soon. We don't know what these will result in, but if they advance, then we can see de-escalation in Yemen. But I don't think that we can see kind of a copy effect of what's happening in Syria or something like that in Yemen at the moment. It's still a very the turmoil is still there. There's still people. I mean, conflict parties now are preparing for a war, a new armed confrontation. So we're far from that at the moment.
Ilham, do you expect any positive trickle-down effect based on the rapid changes in the region now?
I think Libya's in and out of the region as people want to deal with it. So sometimes we're seen as MENA, sometimes we're not mentioned in the conversation around that at all. And so I think we will feel the impact as citizens more, because there will be, and we have already seen, in fact, some of the measures that are taken on travel restrictions and visas, etc., group Libya with the conflicts in general in the region. And so I think it's those kinds of direct impacts on citizens that we will definitely feel. We also will feel it in the sense that some of the key regional players, whether that's Turkey or the Gulf countries, etc., do look at Libya strategically to counterbalance some of the other areas. And so I think we will see a greater attention towards Libya as some of the other conflicts may become too protracted, and there might be gains to be made in the Libyan situation more easily. And so, yes, I think in that way there is a trickle down. I do want to pick up on a point that I think is really important in the conversation that just passed on this idea of intervention, because I think it's important to look at really the only agents of genuinely bringing some of people's voices are civil society. And I think it's important not to forget that. We all represent civil society on this call, yet somehow it's been absent in this conversation. I think it's really important to take note that, it is civil society actually who has been doing the work of trying to find out what people want. It's not something that needs to be reinvented necessarily. It's just creating a space where civil society can impact these political processes or have a say in these processes. And I think what we've seen in Libya for certain, and I would feel confident saying in the other two conflicts, is the deliberate and systematic and unrelenting targeting of civil society. And that is by those actors on the ground trying to silence that and to ensure that their elitism is maintained, and that the oversight is removed. But it's also part of the intervention, right? The fact that the aid has been cut, the fact that support for all of these NGOs, largely in this region, has been cut, is part of the intervention as well. And it is strategic to create a situation where the human rights movement and civil society reverts back several decades in this process. And so I think if we're going to be talking about any conversation about rebuilding or institutions or coming out of conflict, it cannot continue to be only looking at it from the perspective of those who are the troublemakers and the perpetrators, and not those who are genuinely trying to build the countries that we're talking about. And so I would really like to end my intervention and my participation today by saying it really breaks my soul that we had this entire conversation without looking at the impact this has all had on civil society, which is the only component in any of our countries that is actually focused on rebuilding what's going on.
Thank you very much, Ilham, for this crucial reminder. Manal, moving to you and Sudan. And
maybe the type of the war now in Sudan, it makes it so difficult now for us as a Sudanese to feel that we're ready to move on, because we have the trauma. And Sudan war recently, like, it's been stamped by devastated, broken for human dignity. So we have fathers that 4 of his girls raped in front of him. He will not be easy just to come for peace. We have a village that had been bombed, hundreds, a family by the Air Force on the ground, destroyed. You lost all your lineages. And you have a brother, a mother, her kids were killed in front of her, slaughtered. Okay, so the level of trauma makes it difficult for Sudanese now to accept any kind of deal. So we need a process us to move on, so we can really accept any kind of anything. It's high now to say, like, okay, everything is okay, let's sit and have the deal for peace. It's going to be difficult. That's what I see from the media, from the trauma that we Sudanese has it. Although the advancement of and the SAF, the security, national security military advancement in Khartoum give hope that people want to go back to Khartoum, but Khartoum is destroyed. There's destructions. Okay, the remain of weapons, it's everywhere. There's no any cleaning for the help from cleaning the cities from this remaining of the war. So at the same time, we see some regional initiatives, okay, to help and to build. We welcome this. Sudanese are happy to welcome the regional in terms of help and constructions and have some place people can live. But I don't see them now are ready for this. We need a huge work, peace building work. We need a huge media mechanisms that can really elevate these polarizations, which is lacking. And after that, you need to move this community to different stage so it can be ready. We need that first, and then we can look for the building our institutions in a very transparent way. And we have a lot of work waiting us as Sudanese to work, and also with the, like Friends of Sudan to help in these terms. When I say Sudan, I mean all Sudan. No, I mean Sudan that control under RSF or under Khartoum, under Port Sudan governments. So for me, Sudan is whole Sudan. It should not be separated. It should not be split. So we don't want any part of Sudan to go away. As the Sudanese, we don't want that to happen again. It happened in South Sudan and left it because of the corruption, because of the marginalizations, because of the human dignity was really taken to the ground at that part in that war. So we don't want that to happen again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all these insights throughout the past 1.5 hours. I know we tried to cover many issues, but thank you for highlighting lots of important topics and issues, from agency to importance of civil society to importance of institutions and the institutional infrastructure, to the need for a new approach and new way of thinking, but also a new way of doing to ensure accountability and to ensure that external interventions don't do harm. But the centering agency in its broad sense here and in its broad definition was really a major takeaway that also I take from this conversation. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. I did my best to tackle the questions that we received in the Q&A. Thank you so much for our audience for all the questions, and I apologize if I didn't manage to ask all the questions, but they will all be shared with the speakers. Yasmin, Manal, Ilham, thank you so much for all the insights, the expertise, the reflections that you offered us, and for this really important conversations discussing the conflicts in Libya, Yemen, and Sudan. And please do take care, and this is a conversation to be continued. Thank you very much.